This lecture is over Chapter 13, Section 1, the Economic Institution. There will be questions on various slides throughout the presentation that you will be asked to answer on your own sheet of paper and turn in the following day. Alright, so the world is made up of a bunch of societies. For these societies to exist, we must have economic institutions. Economic institutions are the systems of roles and norms that decide the production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services. Because all societies have limited resources, both for production and consumption, economic institutions answer three basic questions. First, what goods and services should be produced? Second, how should these goods and services be produced? And third, for whom should the goods and services be produced? Answering these three questions goes a long way in determining the type of economic institution that a society has. Alright, so question number 1. In your ideal system, how would you answer the following three questions? Explain each of your answers. Number 1. What goods and services should be produced? Number 2. How should these goods and services be produced? And number 3, for whom should the goods and services be produced? Be sure to write your answers out on your piece of paper for tomorrow. So we've established that all societies have economic institutions. These institutions have three sectors. First up is primary. Primary institutions involve the extraction of raw materials from the environment. Examples of this would include the hunting and fishing of animals, mining for resources, and farming for food. The second sector is the secondary sector. The secondary sector is the part of the economy that turns a raw material into a manufactured good. Examples would include turning oil into gasoline or turning a log into a canoe. Finally, there is the tertiary sector. The tertiary sector focuses on providing services to the population. People working in this sector would include doctors, priests, and lawyers. Many third world countries only have the primary sector. The truly strong economies of the world have elements of all three active in their economy. Economic institutions can also be broken down based on the level of economic progress achieved. For instance, we commonly break down into pre-industrial, industrial, and post-industrial. Pre-industrial societies are typically low on technology and focus on the primary sector. Industrial societies are typically Adam Smith's vision of capitalism. Focus in the industrial society is on the secondary sector. There is increased technology and the use of assembly lines. Focus is on production and supply and demand. Finally, we have post-industrial society. Post-industrial societies focus on the tertiary sector. In this society, the acquiring of knowledge is highly valued, and with it comes a higher standard of living. When the standard of living increases, people have more money to spend on non-essentials, so the demand for services increases. Considering the different types of economic institutions, there are two primary models that we'll look at. First is capitalism. A capitalist economy is based on the laws of supply and demand. In a capitalist society, production of goods and cost of goods is based on demand. The greater the demand for an item, the greater the cost. With greater demand also comes greater production or supply. The easiest analogy for this involves the Honus-Wagner baseball card. This card was produced in the early 1900s and came with packs of tobacco. Now I'm guessing that most of you don't know who Honus-Wagner is. I'd also guess that most of you have at least heard of Babe Ruth, Willie Mays, and Mickey Mantle. So why does the Honus-Wagner card bring in millions of dollars when up for sale, while any card of the other three never brings in near this kind of money? The answer is simple. There are only a couple of Honus-Wagner cards on Earth. Supply is low, so cost and demand are high. This supply and demand idea is rooted in Adam Smith's book, Wealth of Nations. In it, Smith discusses the purest form of capitalism, laissez-faire. Laissez-faire translates as to let alone. The idea is that the government doesn't need to be involved in the economy. No regulations on business practices, no regulations on competition. According to Smith, by keeping the government out of the economy, economic freedom is maximized and the laws of supply and demand will properly take care of production and consumption in society. The positives are obvious. Worker motivation can be strong. Economic freedom is given to the populace. Achievement is rewarded. But there are also negatives. Smith's vision doesn't protect workers from the exploitations of owners, nor does it provide for the inequalities educationally, socially, or familial in society for those who are physically or mentally incapable of working in society. In theory, pure capitalism, though never actually tried, appears to exacerbate these problems. Quite possibly the nearest our world has seen to laissez-faire capitalism would be the U.S. during the late 1800s. During that time, the American economy found great success, but the gap between the rich and poor consistently increased, and the disadvantaged found themselves increasingly out of the successful American experience. The second type of economic system is socialism. In a socialist society, roles are reversed from the capitalist system. Economic activity is controlled by the government rather than supply and demand. Socialists recognize that there is inequality in society and in the economic market. They point to inequalities of education and the exploitation of workers by owners. They also suggest that these inequalities in a capitalist setting will eventually lead to a society where only a select few will economically succeed, thus leading to reforms or revolution by the vast majority of the underprivileged. So considering that, socialists are guided by the ideas of social equality and economic fairness with an ultimate goal being communism. In a communist system, once economic equality is achieved, social classes will die off and the role of government as an interfering entity will cease to exist. However, this has never truly happened. Maybe the closest we've seen is something like the League of the Iroquois. In reality, there are only socialist countries such as Venezuela, Cuba, and China. These countries just tell their people that they are communist. This keeps people optimistic. Government has lots of control, but hey, it'll go away sometime soon as we achieve economic equality. Socialists and communists fail to see many realities as well, just like the capitalists. They do not account for a lack of motivation amongst workers. They also don't account for differences in skills and education levels, which then determines inequalities in pay and consumer power. Marx and Engels' book, The Communist Manifesto, is to socialism what Smith's Wealth of Nations is to capitalism. Alright, question number 2. How do the answers to the following 3 questions differ depending on a society's adherence to either capitalism or socialism? Number 1, what goods and services should be produced? Number 2, how should these goods and services be produced? And number 3, for whom should the goods and services be produced? Remember to write your answer on your paper. As I mentioned earlier, the U.S. differs from pure capitalism in several ways. First, the U.S. is immersed in the growth of corporate capitalism, something we'll talk about on the next slide. Second, the U.S. economy has become truly globalized. Thus, we are too interconnected with other economies to be truly capitalistic. And third, the U.S. government has continually expanded its role in the economy over the past 80 years or so, basically since the inception of the New Deal as a means of counteracting the Depression of the 1930s. Now we need to talk about corporate capitalism. In an unregulated economy, pure capitalism, corporations tend to take control of the economy. This occurs because of laws and court rulings that allow corporations to be treated by law as if they are an individual, thus granting individual and privatized rights to giant corporate organizations. Corporate capitalism dilutes pure capitalism in several ways. First off, it changes the ownership element. In the early U.S., businesses were run by individual owners. Today you have groups of people that head up business. Second, the idea of corporations is that it diversifies ownership to a group. However, most stockholders have little, if any, involvement in the actual running of businesses. In fact, most American corporate stocks are owned by other corporations, Wall Street firms, foreign governments, and pensioner mutual funds. Finally, there is a small group of corporations that make such great profits and have such incredible power that they control American business activities and generate huge chunks of all business done in America. The ultimate result of the rise of corporate capitalism is the development of oligopolies. An oligopoly is when a select few producers control an entire industry. Most manufacturing in the U.S. is done by oligopolies. Oligopolies become dangerous for society because they can oftentimes limit production, and because of their outsized power, they can use pressure tactics to alter laws and influence politics. These oligopolies in the U.S. function at a political level through the use of lobbyists. These actions actually weaken the likelihood of self-regulation, which is a key component to Adam Smith's capitalism. Instead, we're left with a supposed capitalist society that is, in actuality, largely manipulated by the actions of a select few oligopolies. Question number 3. How do oligopolies impact the capitalist principles? How do oligopolies have the potential to undermine a democratic political system? Remember to write your answers on your paper. Alright, here's a couple of definitions for you. I don't need to add anything beyond what's here, so I'll shut up and give you a minute to copy. Question number 4. Protectionism versus free trade. Which side are you on and why? Write your answers on your paper. There are a couple of economic trends that we see developing around the world. The first one to mention is the concept of globalization. While at one point it was each society's goal to become economically independent, we have now reached a point of international economic dependence. Because of trade agreements, the diverse allocation of resources, and the safety and protection of unification, we are now more economically dependent on what happens in Greece, Germany, Ireland, and Japan than we have ever been in our history. When Greece's economy struggles, the U.S. stock market takes a dive. When the U.S. has increased production of oil profits among the OPEC countries of the world decrease. Today we have meetings such as the G8 where the most economically powerful countries on Earth meet to determine what must be done to maintain economic stability and profits worldwide. Other agreements such as the European Union and NAFTA also have an impact. The EU has created a common currency throughout most of Europe, and NAFTA has provided for cheaper labor in North America, which ultimately means lesser worker rights and protections, but also cheaper products in the marketplace. The other economic trend to note is the expanding role of government. Governments worldwide are increasingly regulating economic activity by creating trade restrictions or agreements, creating pollution emissions, worker protection, and consumer protection regulations. Governments are also increasingly providing certain public goods, such as increased access to health care, government-funded social programs, and educational funding. The ultimate goal of all of this is to promote the economic well-being of society. Whether this is accomplished by increased government roles is obviously up for debate.